Right. So, anybody who knows me well know that I have a tendency to make excuses. Nathan, I apologize for making some excuses I've made. Another thing I do is I justify my excuses. I mean, after all, I'm very busy. I mean, I'm taking 17 credits. Basketball takes at least 20 hours a week. I work in the mornings, and I do all these things, every week, and so I try to justify the excuses I make. The thing about the excuses I make is that they can, they're just excuses, and that's where I want to go today. The passage I'm talking about is Exodus 3 and 4. A lot of excuses I make, I see Moses making the same excuses when talking to God. And Exodus 3, it starts with Moses tending his flock, and he leads his flock to the back of the wilderness, and then he goes to the mountain of God, where he saw a burning bush. And so he goes over to start investigating the bush. And then once God sees that Moses, had his attention, God calls out to Moses. And this is where, real quick, I want to pause right here, and I just, write this down real quick. The first thing is this: if God gets your attention, pay attention. We have a tendency to, well, at least I know I do, and maybe you do too. We can have a thought about a certain person. We feel like we need to talk to somebody, or we have a heart for a certain group, organization. Maybe it's the poor, or maybe it's just somebody who is not living right, and you just have God's laid on your heart to talk to them. But we can have a tendency to not do it, or maybe make excuses for why we don't need to do it. And so that's why when God gets our attention, it's not just because it's a random thought. God puts it on our life for a specific reason. And the next thing I want to point out is that we are God's answers to prayer. Exodus 3, it says, "So I've come down to deliver them." This is God speaking. Out of the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up from the land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to a place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. So, right here I can see Moses. He's probably thinking it's really cool. God's going to go and deliver his people. And then this next verse, he says, "Come now, therefore, and I will send you. I'll send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people." And I can just see Moses' face drop. Like, you're going to send me? And I want to point out, we're God's answers to prayer. All of us are going to be leaders of some sort in the church, or maybe an organization, youth pastors. And I want to point out, in Matthew 5:10, Jesus said to his disciples, Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, "Go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, as you go and preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand." But right before he said this in Matthew 10:5, the end of Matthew 9, he says, "Therefore pray the Lord of the harvest send out the laborers in his harvest." So at the end of 9, he's saying, pray that God will send people to harvest. And then beginning of Matthew 10, he's saying, now go. So we are God's answers to prayer. All right. And so I'm going to get back to the story. Moses talking to God, and God tells Moses to go. And we see Moses start making excuses. The first excuse Moses makes is he's questioning his own authority. Exodus 3:11 says, "But Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?'" Now, basically what Moses was saying was that he was a nobody. And that, I know I can have a tendency to say this. I'll get a feeling, well, right now what I'm dealing with is one of my best friends is in jail. He'll be gone for a long time. And I've been having communications with his mom. And I made promises to his mom that I was going to send a letter to the court, and that I was going to keep in touch with him just because he's not doing well. And so, I found myself using this first excuse. I told her I wanted to do this, but then I started thinking, like, who am I to do this? I'm not a pastor really. I'm just in school, And I feel like this could be a tendency for a lot of people just to say, who am I? And God responds, and God says, I'll certainly be with you. In 12. And what God is saying here, I like. God's not saying, he's not going to try to talk him up, saying, oh no, you are somebody. What God is saying is basically that, yeah, you are nobody, but I'm God, and I'm going to be with you. You know, Moses was a nobody, but God is a somebody. You know, he went on to tell Moses, I am that I am, you know, meaning that who he was is everything, you know, he's significant. The second excuse Moses brings is, he says in 13, what shall I say to them? No, I've used this excuse as well, probably time and time again. I've had friends who want me to go out and witness, especially in my last church, and I'll say, you know, in myself, I'll say, I don't know what to say to them. And God answers and says, you know, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, the Lord God of your father, and the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. So God responds, and the rest of 15, he's basically telling Moses what to say. And what that says for me is that, you know, God gives us the words to say, you know, when we need to say them. We can see this again in Matthew 10:19. You know, Jesus says, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you shall speak. So God is, you know, telling Moses, you know, I'm giving you the words to say, you know, go and say the words I'm telling you to say. And so Moses responds with another excuse. He says, then Moses answered and said, but suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say, the Lord has not appeared to you. And this is probably the excuse I use most often. I have a tendency to say, you know, why go talk to somebody? Because, you know, they're probably just not going to believe me anyways. And I'll think that there's no point of talking to somebody. Especially, you know, talking to strangers is actually easier than talking to close friends. And I'll use that excuse. They grew up with me. You know, why would they believe me in the first place? And God responds in some amazing ways. God responds by telling Moses to do 3 things. The first thing, he asks Moses what's in his hand. And Moses says a rod. And God says, all right, you know, throw that on the ground. And he threw it on the ground and it turned into a snake. And I can see Moses right now turning the snake. He just jumps back, you know, the snake. Because, you know, and then God says, pick it up. At that point, I'll say, no, you pick it up. You know, but we see Moses, he goes, picks it up. And what this says is that God uses the things that are in our hands. For me, if God was to come to me, I'm most certain I'd probably have a basketball in my hand. And God would say, you can use that basketball. You know, and for each and every one of us, God can use the things that are, you know, closest to us or the most easy to us. Some of us are really good at writing. You know, God can use that. You know, for me, I've always been a natural athlete. I can show the light of God through basketball. You know, whether I make, you know, excuses or on the court, that's really easy to do when you play, or yell at the referees, or, you know, get mad at teammates. But when you don't do that, people can notice. I mean, especially young people, youth who are watching. You know, they grow up watching the NBA and they see them fighting and complaining about calls. Their hands go up. But when they see me, you know, I'll know it's a bad call. I'll just say, all right, and I run back down, you know, with a smile, and that can be witnessed. The second thing God tells Moses to do, he tells him to take his hand and put it. You know, the Bible says put it in your bosom, but really it means your heart. I know I was explaining this to the children, and I said bosom, and all of them started laughing. I'm like, no, not your butt. You know, and when he pulled it out, it was white like snow. It had leprosy. And then he said, all right, now put it in again. And he put it in again and pulled it out. And I love what God says right here. It says, and behold, it was restored like his other flesh. And what this tells me is that God can use our testimony. You know, leprosy is a skin disease for those of you who don't know. I'm pretty sure everybody in here knows what leprosy is. But the significance of it was, you know, we have been restored. By our testimony, people will believe. You know, they can't deny our testimony. When I go to people and they see that I'm a ministry major, it blows some people away. You know, because I won't talk to people for a year or so, and just as this last week, I was talking to my friend Jose. He went to my church. He's living with his grandma, and his grandma's forcing him to come to church. And I was talking to Jose, and he asked what I was doing. I told him, I'm a ministry major, and he was blown away just because he knew who I was before. He was one of the people I would go and, he lived in a trailer. I'd go in his trailer, and we would go and smoke a lot and drink, and he just couldn't believe where I am now. Our testimony is one thing that people can't deny, and that's what God was telling him. And the last thing that God told Moses, if they still didn't believe, was take water from the river and pour it on dry land, and it will be turned to blood. And what God was saying was here is that, this is a picture of if they didn't listen, bad things were going to happen. Because the river was their resource. That was what they relied on for, water, food, stuff like that. And the picture of blood showed that what they relied on was not, was going to fail them. And so Moses, even still, he makes one more excuse. He says, "Oh my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servants, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." Moses tried to use his lack of ability to say that he couldn't do this. And for me, the reason I wanted to write this was because I used the same excuse when I was asked to write a letter. Dr. Ziefel knows this. My writing skills are not all that great, and she wanted me to write a letter to the judge. I would probably just sound foolish, just because I'm not the best writer in the world. But God uses this excuse, and God's response, he says, "Who made man's mouth? Or who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I'll be with your mouth, and teach you what you shall say." By saying this, God is saying, "I know you, Moses." And God says to me, "I know you, Brandyn. I can use your writing skills. You don't have to be a perfect writer to get a point across." And so I did. I could not do this sermon without writing those letters. So I wrote a letter to the judge, just saying who Cody was before I knew him, growing up. I've known Cody since 3rd grade. And I wrote a letter just saying what kind of person he was and how I remembered him. And then I wrote a letter to Cody. And in this letter I shared the love of Jesus. I shared the gospel. I shared that he can have hope. Even though he's looking at probably life in prison. He can have hope. And even still, this is the last thing, God's sitting here, he's telling Moses, "I'm going to be with you, I made you, I did all these things." He's trying to lift him up. And Moses still, he says, "Oh my Lord, please send by the hand of whoever else." Now, hold on, Moses, are you kidding me? After everything God has just done, you still want, you still are asking God to send somebody else? And it says, the Lord, he says, "So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses." This is one of the times in the Bible where the anger of the Lord is directly put on another person, or for another person, instead of like a nation. And it goes on to say, "Is not Aaron, the Levite, your brother? I know that he can speak well, and look, he is also coming out to meet you." So God, agrees. He says, "All right, I'll give you another person." But God did not like the fact that Moses said to send somebody else. And rightfully so, because God, in God's eyes, he's trying to use Moses to save children that he loves. And Moses is saying no. And that could say, something for me, or maybe for you. God puts things on our heart because he loves children. Everybody. He loves Cody just as much as he loves me. And he made a mistake. But through me, I have a chance to share God's love. And I want to end with that. The reason I chose to talk about this excuses is because I was making a lot of excuses. I was using every excuse. Like Moses, I started thinking, who was I to write a letter to the court? I would not even know what to say. The court won't believe me anyways. And I am a horrible writer, so I would just look like a fool writing to the judge. And I want to end this saying, what's your excuse? Who is God telling you to speak to? What is God laying on your heart? For me, it was my friend Cody and a lot of other friends right now. I know I have a list that I need to get in contact. I have friends who are in rehab or jail or in counseling, and I want to reach out to them. And I'm no longer going to make excuses. And I encourage you not to either. Thank you.